Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf contains three sugyas. The first two concern the sprinkling of the blood on the Aron, in front of the Aron in Kodesh Kodashim, done by the Kohen Gadol as part of the Yom Kippur Avoda. The first sugya, the Gemara discusses a few halachas about that sprinkling, how exactly it was performed, if it was meant to hit the kaporos or just be in front of it, and how the different types of sprinklings are learned from each other. The second one discusses the counting, what was the order of the counting and why it was counted in that way. The Gemara will then move on to the machlokas which we've seen about whether it was one stand to hold a bowl of blood or two separate stands, one for each bowl of blood. The Gemara will link that to another machlokas and compare the two. So let's begin the daf. The Gemara is discussing the sprinkling of the blood in front of the kaporos. Now there are two sets of blood. There's the blood of the par, the cow, brought by the Kohen Gadol, and there's the blood of the soyer, the goat. Each one has to be sprinkled in front of the Aron, and it involves two sprinklings each, one up and one down. Achas lemad, lov achas lemata. Now, the Gemara teaches us a few halachos, and the Gemara will show us how we learn these things out of the psukim. So first of all, the Gemara has said, when we say up and down, we don't mean that he sprinkles one on top and one below. We mean that it's in a kematzlif. The Mishnah said it's kematzlif. The Gemara defines what does kematzlif mean, meaning it's an upward motion or a downward motion. Kematzlif means like a whip, where somebody's whipping going from up to down in a downward slash. That's what it means to sprinkle downward. Sprinkling upward is the reverse. He starts with his hand low and he sweeps it in an upwards motion. That's what the two sprinklings, the up and the down, are. Sprinkling in a downward motion or an upward motion, but the Gemara says both of them did not touch the actual kaporos itself. Nothing went on the kaporos. They just went in front of the kaporos and fell to the floor. Now, how do we derive these halachos? So, there are four types of sprinklings. There's the soyer and the goat. There is the up and the down. How do we derive all of these? So, the Torah refers to all of them. It mentions all four sprinklings. It says by the soyer up and down, and it says by the par up and down. But by the par, it says the number by the down. The down sprinklings, it says you should sprinkle 7 times lifnei hakaporos. 7 times lifnei refers to in front of it, which is what we assume is the down sprinkling. It's the downward motion. That's the lifnei. It does not say how many are on the al hakaporos. Al hakaporos is the one that goes on top. That's the upward. Now, the soyer is the opposite. It says, describing the sprinkling on top, the al hakaporos, it says that you should sprinkle one time, because it says, you should sprinkle it. That's one sprinkling. Not sprinkling them, but sprinkling it. However, as far as the lower sprinklings, the lifnei, it doesn't say how many. So what do we end up having? We know that there's the par and the soyer. We know that there's an up sprinkling and a down sprinkling. We know that the up sprinkling is called al, that it goes on the kaporos, and we know that the down sprinkling is called lifnei, that goes in front of the kaporos. As far as numbers, we only have a number by the soyer on top and by the par on the bottom. So the Gemara says we either have to learn the two soyers from each other, and just like the up sprinkling of the soyer we know is once, the down sprinkling is once. And just like the par sprinkling, the lower sprinkling, the lifnei is 7 times, the upper sprinkling should also be 7 times. Or we do the opposite. We learn from soyer to par, the soyer to par, the up sprinkling to the up sprinkling from the soyer to par, and both are once, and the down sprinkling to the down sprinkling from par to soyer, and they both are 7 times. Which one am I supposed to do? So the Gemara says, the pasuk tells us that the two sprinklings for the two animals should be the same. The phrase that it says is you should do the same thing. That means that we should compare the down of the par to the down of the soyer, just like the down of the par was 7 times, the down of the soyer was 7 times, and the up of the soyer, which was 1 time, to the up of the par, which was 1 time. So now we know both animals have the same thing, the up sprinkling once and a down sprinkling 7 times. Now, the Gemara says, if that's the case, we have an extra thing by both of them. Because if I have to learn anyway from the par to the soyer to know how many times you should sprinkle the down sprinkling, because by the par it says it's 7 times, by the soyer it doesn't say how many times, so why do you have to tell me altogether that you need to sprinkle anything by the soyer? I anyway have to learn from the par to the soyer, so just don't mention it. That is obviously extra. So why is that extra? So the Gemara says that extra phrase is to teach me a connection between the two sprinklings of the soyer, the down and the up. the extra phrase that it says by the down sprinkling, it tells me about the down sprinkling, even though I don't know the details of that halacha, because it doesn't tell me how many, and I end up having to learn it from the par. The extra phrase by the soyer, the down sprinkling, is to teach me a halacha from there to the up sprinkling of the soyer. What is that halacha? It's supposed to teach me that just like the down sprinkling is lifnei, it doesn't touch the kaporos, it just goes in front of it and falls to the floor. The same thing applies to the up sprinkling, where it says that you sprinkle al ha-kaporos on the kaporos. It doesn't mean literally on it, it just means that you start from on top, and it's an up sprinkling, it's on top, but it falls to the floor. It just goes in front of the kaporos and drops to the floor. It doesn't actually land on the kaporos itself. Once we know that that's true by the soyer, both in the up sprinkling and the down sprinkling, that it doesn't touch the kaporos, then I can learn that the same thing is true in the par, because the two are linked. It says that the two sprinklings are the same. Gemara says that's a very fascinating limud, but you can invert that exact limud the other way. And you could say, look, the par sprinkling that's up is extra, because I don't know how many. It doesn't say how many sprinklings you need on the up of the par. I end up having to learn that from the up sprinkling of the goat, the soyer. So why does it say the par sprinkling on the up sprinkling of the par? If I anyway have to learn the number from the soyer, don't tell me anything about it. I can learn the entire thing from the soyer. Obviously, that sprinkling is extra. Why is that sprinkling extra? So I should learn from the up sprinkling of the par to the down sprinkling of the par, and I'll say as follows. Just like the up sprinkling of the par, it says al ha-kaporos, which seems to indicate that it should go on the actual kaporos and it should actually touch it. I should also learn that the down sprinkling is also supposed to actually touch it. And then I'll end up learning the opposite of what you said. Both sprinklings do have to touch the kaporos. And then I'll learn from there, from the par where both sprinklings have to touch, to the soyer where both sprinklings also have to touch, and have the exact opposite limit that you had. So, how do you know which way to learn? You have an extra sprinkling by the lower sprinkling, the down sprinkling, which simply the pashtus is that that's not touching, and you want to learn from there that the up sprinkling is also not touching. You also have an extra sprinkling by the up touching, and you want to learn from there that since the pashtus is that that is touching, that the down sprinkling also is touching. Which one? So Gemara says it's clear you have to learn from the down sprinkling of the soyer that that's not touching, that the up sprinklings are also not touching. Why? Because if I don't, then I have nothing else to do with that extra phrase telling me about the down sprinkling of the soyer. However, if I use that extra phrase to teach me that the sprinklings are all supposed to be like the down sprinkling, which is not touching, then I do have something to do with the extra phrase, which tells me that the par has an up sprinkling. What should I do with that extra What will I do with that extra phrase? So we have a brisa that says that extra phrase is to connect it to the word lifnei. It says el pnei kaporos kedma. Teach me anytime it says el pnei, anytime it says in front of. Here it specifies kedma, that means on the east side. So to any time you need to do anything that's el pnei or al pnei, it should also be on the east side, and that's a special halacha I learned from that phrase, and that's what that phrase is for. Therefore, it's not extra. Therefore, I'm going to darshan it this way. I'm going to do the drasha from the down sprinkling to the up sprinkling, that both are not touching, and that way all the extra psukim are used rather than do from the up sprinkling to the down sprinkling, that they're both not touching and have nothing to do with the extra pasuk talking about the down sprinkling. Okay, that teaches me all the halachas I need to know. Now the Gemara moves on to its next discussion, and that is the counting of the sprinkling. So we said there's 1 up and 7 down, but every time you count the 7 down, you also mention the 1 up. And there's 2 versions of how we count it. So Machlokas Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Meir, we say 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. We say 1, that's the up sprinkling. Then we say 1 and 1. That's recounting the up sprinkling and mentioning the first sprinkling on the down. And then we say 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, 1 and 5, 1 and 6, 1 and 7. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's the opposite. I say 1, 1 and 1, 2 and 1, 3 and 1, 4 and 1, 5 and 1, 6 and 1. Instead of saying 1 and 7, for example, we say 7 and 1. We mention the plural before the singular. We mention the down before the up. The Gemara says there's actually no machlokas. It's different ways of counting, in different customs, in different places. Just like today, different languages will say a number that has a tens column and a ones column. Some will say the ones column first, and some will say the tens column first. Some will say, for example, 42, and some will say 2 and 40. So there were different customs in the town of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and that's why they had different customs as to how the sprinkling was counted, but it's not ma'akev either way. That's just how they did it in those particular instances. Now the Gemara wants to know, why do we have to mention the up counting? Why do we have to recount the 1 and 1 and? What's the 1 for? Well, you said it once. So the machlokes, if this is a gzeir of the chachamim as a protection, just so that we shouldn't make a mistake. Rabbi Yochanan says it's to give us, Rabbi Elazar says it's to give the Kohen Gadol extra time to clarify which one he's up to. He has a bit of a break by saying one and, to make sure he doesn't make a mistake. According to Rabbi Yochanan, no, it's Exeris HaKosav, that's what we have to do, because the Torah has an extra word, Yazeh. It says, Lifnei HaKappara is Yazeh Sheva Pa'amim, and it already said you should do a sprinkling. Why does it say Yazeh Sheva Pa'amim? It's an extra word to say that you count the original sprinkling with the later sprinklings. It's Exeris HaKosav. The Gemara says there's a big difference halachically between the two opinions. According to Rabbi Elazar, that it's just coming to avoid mistakes. If you don't do it and you don't make a mistake, it's fine. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's Exeris HaKosav. This is how it has to be done. It's ma'akev if you don't count it correctly. Even if you didn't make any mistake in the numbers, then it's possible and it has to be done over again. It was not done correctly. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to its next sugya, connecting a machlokes in our Mishnah with a different machlokes. We'd seen machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim when the Kohen Gadol came out with the bowl of blood and he put it down on a stand. Were there two stands, one for the soyer and one for the par? Or was there one stand and he had to pick one up? He had to pick up the one that was standing there before he could put down the one that he was holding, because he had to switch. He first took the blood of the par, then he took the blood of the soyer, then he went back to the blood of the par, then back to the blood of the soyer. Did he have different stand? He had two stands and one stand. So Gemara says that machlokes is probably the same as a different machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, and the root of both machlokes are: is it enough to label something in writing that this is what it is? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't just label this is the one for the blood of the soyer and this is the one for the blood of the par. We're afraid that the Kohen Gadol in his weakness may get confused and take the wrong one. Therefore, labeling is not enough. According to the Chachamim, you could have two stands. Label either one. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't have two stands, and therefore you have to make sure that he knows to switch every time, and he has to pick up one before he puts down the other one. You have to have only one stand. Now, where do you see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's not enough to label? So Rabbi Yehuda says that in the Beis HaMikdash, as we know, there were chests set aside for people to put coins for various funds that they wish to contribute to. Rabbi Yehuda says there was no chest, there was no box for people who needed to bring a carbon that required two birds as a chova, as an obligation. One is a carbon olas of, one is a carbon as olas chatas. There was no box for that. Because if we would have put a box there, people would have gotten confused. They would have mixed up the boxes for the olas of, for the birds which were chova, obligatory, one of which is a chatas, and the birds which were olos, which were all carbon ola. People would have gotten mixed up between the ola and the chatas. And if you do that, then when the Kohen takes the money out of the box in order to buy the birds, to actually be mock of them, he'll be taking from the chova box. He'll be taking from the Nadava box, the voluntary box, which are all olos, and somebody will have put in there money which is supposed to be for a chatas. And the procedure for bringing the different birds, a ola and a chatas, is different, and therefore he'll do it wrong. And you can't have a situation like that. Now, according to the Chachamim, there were two boxes. And how did we avoid the problem of people being confused and putting it in the wrong box? You label it. You write on it. This is for Karbanos Chova, and this is for Karbanos Nadava. Rabbi Yehuda obviously doesn't hold to that, and it's the same opinion of Rabbi Yehuda here, who holds that labeling is not enough. Says the Gemara, this cannot be the pshat. This is not the reason for this machlokes. The reason is because Rabbi Yehuda cannot possibly have a problem with labeling. Labeling is not the issue. Rabbi Yehuda is fine with labeling. The Gemara is going to prove from Rabbi Isa that Rabbi Yehuda is fine with labeling. Therefore, that's not the pshat in the machlokes about the boxes of coins. And later on the next half, the Gemara will get to what is the pshat in the machlokes about the blood of the par and the soyer. Now, how do you know that the machlokes about the boxes has nothing to do with labeling? The Gemara says, because I'm going to bring you a brisa that shows Rabbi Yehuda doesn't have a problem with labeling. There's a brisa which clearly is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, it says so, and it discusses there were 13 donation chests in the Beis HaMikdash. 7 of them were labeled for various things, and 6 of them were all labeled for nidava, for extra karbanos. What were the 7 labeled for? So Rabbi Yehuda says as follows. One was for new shkalim that was supposed to be brought for this year's round of shkalim. They could be brought at 3 different periods throughout the year. It was labeled for this year because it had the specific shkalim uses. Then there was a box for last year's shkalim, which went to fix the walls and other things like that. Then, besides that, there was a box for bird karbanos, that's karbanos ola. This was a box for birds that are brought from the species called a tor. It was a different box for birds that were b'nei Yona, all karbanos ola, because Rabbi Yehuda's opinion who holds that there was no box for karbanos chova, birds that were obligatory. Then there was a box for wood, donations to the wood. There was a box for donated Lavona spices, which could be brought on the Mizbeach voluntarily. And there was a box for gold that was meant to be used to make kalim for the Beis HaMikdash out of mizrakos and the bowls and things like that. Then there were 6 other boxes that were all for voluntary karbanos, that the 6 families of Kohanim who served each week, each mishmar, each week's shift was divided into 6 families. One served each day of the week besides for Shabbos, that if the Mizbeach was not used for any time, they would take money from those voluntary donation boxes by karbanos to bring on the Mizbeach during that time. So anyway, what we see from here is that Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds that labeling works, because he describes there were 13 boxes and they were each labeled as to what they're for. So Rabbi Yehuda's problem is not labeling. What then is the reason that Rabbi Yehuda says there was no box for karbanos for birds that were obligatory? Gemara says because he was concerned that maybe somebody will put money in a box for a pair of karbanos that he owes, one of which is a karban chatas, and that person will have died, and we will not know that, and will bring his karban chatas. And the halacha is that a karban chatas whose owner has died, that karban chatas cannot be brought; it has to be left to die on its own. It's possible to go on the mizbeach, and that's why we didn't have a box so that people had to come alive and show their presence and actually buy karbanos to give to Kohanim and say, "Bring this for me." So Gemara says this is not correct. There is no concern that if somebody sends money for a karban chatas that he has died himself, because we know that the halacha is, we have a brisa clearly says, halacha is if somebody sends money from overseas and he mails it to the Beis HaMikdash, he sends it with a messenger and he says, please bring a karban chatas for me, you're allowed to bring it. You could assume he's alive. He has a cheskas chayim, you could assume he's alive. So that's not the problem. So Gemara says no, the problem is something else. The problem is that in a case where we know the guy died, but we won't know which money is his. He put money in the box to buy karbanos chatas, and we don't know which one is his. It's all mixed in there. We're going to end up having to bring it, and we're not allowed to. So Gemara asks, why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda hold of, why don't we just say breira? Why don't we just say that the money that's left over at the end of the day, that'll be set aside as his karban chatas, and we won't bring it? Well, the money that we'll take, we will say that this money is not his money. It's all mixed together. The value is all in there. Every money we'll take out, we'll say this is for this person's carbon, this is for this person, this is for this carbon. The dead person will leave his for the end, and we'll get rid of that money as we're supposed to properly dispose of it. So the Gemara says that's relying on a concept called breira, that you could define which money is which after the fact. And Rabbi Yehuda does not hold of that. In the next daf, the Gemara will explain how we know that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of that.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.